Disinformation knows no borders, and today the stakes seem higher than ever. Welcome to Truth Talks, a brave new podcast series tackling the challenges of fake news and propaganda head on. Join us for engaging short conversations with experts from all EU member states and Ukraine as we uncover the truth behind dominant disinformation trends and explore the strategies shaping Europe's fight against manipulation. In this episode, we are zooming in on Finland. Our guest today is Mikko Salo, the founder and executive director at Faktabaari, a Finnish NGO dedicated to combating misinformation and promoting media literacy. Welcome to Truth Talks.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
Our pleasure. Finland, like its Nordic neighbors, is known for strong media freedom and high public trust in journalism, factors that help build resilience against disinformation. However, no country is entirely immune to the spread of false narratives. Could you start by shedding some light on the dominant disinformation narratives that are currently circulating in Finland?
First of all, as a fact checker and having kind of studied this one, it's very difficult to say that to differentiate because nobody really knows, especially what is happening in the social media and all that times. But of course, we have seen patterns to erode trust and create confusion on the public debate and trying to kind of, for example, diminish the support to Ukraine that is very strong in Finland. And some of them can be attributed possibly to Russia. But altogether, if I praise normally our system, that we are pretty united in support of the Ukraine, and we kind of hope to understand the Kremlin playbook on dividing us on this type of topics. This said, it's very difficult sometimes to attribute things directly to a third country, or just then sometimes we got our own populistic forces that just hook into topics like migration or something like that that are of course sensitive topics and are this kind of might divide the population as such. What happened, I mean, after the Russian attack to Ukraine, I mean, of course the big development was that Finland applied and joined NATO in a record time and after kind of long-term kind of preparations and all that. But at that time, there was a little bit the kind of stories that tried to undermine the NATO about the Western unity and all that type of things. That is it really worthwhile? But I think we were kind of prepared for that one and didn't fall too much onto that one, and that was a success this far. This said, I have to say that my personal opinion is that we haven't received a full-scale attack on disinformation yet, because there are unfortunately more vulnerable countries, especially towards Russia in rest of the Europe as well, because of the historical reasons. We are pretty united in this.
So many questions, secondary follow up questions arise after me hearing your answer to my first question. So, you mentioned that the major goal of potential external actors that are spreading slash fanning disinformation is dividing the society. Am I right? Do you see any other goals or further final goals of these divisions?
Yeah, I think the polarization of the society, trying to hook to the some cleavages there are more like in internal politics, because in foreign policy Finland is very united. That might serve, of course, third countries. It can serve, of course, internal purposes as well, and work to the same goal. Of course, at the moment is as well, because it's so detrimentally important that Europe stands together and united. So sometimes you might hear then stories undermining the EU's capacity, for example, to stand united, and that kind of distrust to the European approach to tackle disinformation or something like that. But I don't know, has it been so very systematic towards Finland in that stage, so that we could kind of pick it like this is the number one thing as well. But I mean, it's a very complex online sphere. Thanks God we have still journalistic media. We have relatively strong media literacy culture and rations, and especially in case of the Ukraine, I mean, the whole country is so united on that front. So that as such hasn't caused at least problems this far. Of course, like the developments in Ukraine hasn't been what we wished, of course, entirely. So now it's more like, what's going to be the future, and I mean, and all that. But I think we are pretty analytical and pretty united on the foreign policy part, especially.
You also mentioned that one of the narratives or maybe goals of disinformation spread used to be diminishing the importance of NATO. And here, my question would be if it's really about disinformation or more about spreading interpretations, because we also know that, for example, Emmanuel Macron said once that NATO was brain dead. So we could also group this quote into the same basket of interpretations slash disinformation. So is it disinformation, or is it diminishing, degrading interpretation? How to look at it?
I think it's a fair way to say that, because of course we know that the NATO is not an easy. It's an intergovernmental organizations, and its capacity to work has been, of course, under debate, especially now that after the Trump has come into power and all that. But yeah, okay, it's in a way Finland is a new NATO member and of course an old EU member, and in Finland we are still kind of ongoing the debate and understanding what the NATO really means as well. So I think it's fair enough to have different interpretations and all that, but some of the things that have at least come to our view could be easily labeled also as a kind of trying to ridicule the efforts that still have been successful overall until now, at least.
Coming back to the major actors, because actually you mentioned Russia by name, but are there any other actors? In many countries, it's often politicians themselves and local politicians who are actually the ones that construct new disinformation themes. How does it look like in Finland?
Certainly, there is let's say, on domestic policy issues, there are tensions, and we see that is certainly part of the picture. So we talk about domestic disinformants and all that. Those are often more difficult to come up, and we haven't been able to, at least in Faktabaari, to surface a systematic manipulation efforts to the extent that there's been, for example, like the Russian troll farms or anything like that. This said, I think it's fair enough, and that's where you need the journalistic media and the independent NGOs to surface that type of things. And for example, during the European elections within our Nordic partners, we didn't reveal it, but I would still say that one of the biggest observation was Swedish Democrats that had a troll factory basically within the country, and were working on their political goals on a very systematic and manipulative way, using pretty much the same technologies and all that I assume for example, the Russian troll factories have been using. So that is very important to keep in mind at the same time. Not everything is coming from abroad. And of course, lately, what is, of course, most worrying, and is now widely debated, of course, everywhere, that when the digital power, as we call it here, has really shown its face, I mean, Elon Musk being the, so to say, the symbol of it. So that really shows us when billionaire very close to political power is able to give a platform for a whole kind of ideology and the thought. So that is, of course, super serious. And I think it's kind of lately has been even like overthrown the rest of the phenomena that are, of course, serious, because then you are just giving a whole platform for one type of interpretation of freedom of speech that is at least quite strange to my mind to the European approach. And this is where you really give the voice to all the very polarizing and content and hate speech and pollute the whole information sphere. and then you just like all the sensible people are leaving it, and that's very dangerous as well. So this is even more systemic, and I think that at the moment that is more serious
And is
for
it
our
still
information.
the talk about disinformation or
Yeah,
about something else, something bigger than that?
this is even bigger than disinformation, so to say, but of course it gives you the whole platforms that are much more prone to spreading that type of content, and it kind of encourages a very polarizing emotional content, and I mean, of course, disinformation benefits of that one. So then we are talking really on the systemic level, the problems. But and I mean, and if I would be, let's say, Putin or something, of course, I would like to kind of use these type of platforms and the hate speech and the polarizing things, and then people start to fear and feel uncomfortable, and then in Nordic countries, the public trust that is very important, and this kind of cohesion starts. You might try to erode that one. Luckily, there are counter movements to that one still, but that is certainly part of the same phenomenon.
You mentioned that the actors that are at the beginning of this chain of disinformation production and spreading are often difficult to spot. At the
Mm.
same time, you mentioned Russia, as we already discussed, and the local politicians. Are there any other actors that are important actors in terms of disinformation in Finland?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Russian narratives are the ones that we have been able to identify also on the European scale, because that is the kind of divide and rule type of things, and you always put things completely upside down, and you hook into the vulnerabilities of the democracies that are present, of course, and democracies are complex systems, so to say. But I think that's one of the easy to identify narratives as such, relatively so. Whereas, and there, thanks to a lot of studies and other factors, we have been able to come up with some joint narratives, and you can even see that cross border. Then, when it comes to systematic influence by other actors, as said, on the domestic front, we haven't been able to identify at least as systematic stuff. Nothing comparable. Obviously, yes, there's been discussion on China. That's still not such a big issue. It's not so present in Finland in a way, because it's a different thing to have 1,340 kilometers in common with Russia, and I mean, China is still far away, even if very present, of course, in the debates. And outside that, of course, now it's appearing. I mean, with the Trump and the kind of tactics that especially the far right has been using in more like a Trumpian playbook coming into play, because it's a very powerful playbook, because it kind of builds on the same type of fears and prejudices and uses the polarization. So, but I mean, who are exactly the actors? I mean, this attribution is still very difficult to do on that front. But
That's why it's such an widespread phenomenon
yes,
because it's so
exactly.
difficult to spot.
Exactly. And as said, the big challenge at the moment is that these marketing platforms, so talking about the so-called social media that doesn't have anything social anymore, but they live up to the emotions. And I mean, still our roots in fact checking, you see that there is no room for fact-based public debate on this front. So this type of a content very easily hijack the platforms and hijack the debate, and then especially the moderate forces that are still, I believe, and I also know based on the research, that are much more prevailing. They just don't want to contribute, and so then people get the feel that, this is mainstream, and this is really, people are getting nuts.
You also mentioned in your first answer the fact that the disinformation in Finland nowadays often relates to Ukraine and has as its goal reducing the support to Ukraine. Yes, but it's more on about the theme of disinformation. But
Mm.
what are the disinformative false narratives related to that? What kind of topics are
Mm.
addressed?
I think, as such, perhaps that was more the big picture since 2022. So I mean, I think whoever tries that one, probably Russia, but might be other actors to divide, they have kind of understand that, Finland is pretty united on that front. I mean, there are, for example, of presidential elections, all the candidates were very much in the same line, whatever party they are. That's very particular. So that doesn't pay off. But as said, it's more like trying to hook to sensitive questions. I mean, the economy is not going very strong. People have challenges in their daily lives, and the incertitudes are coming. It's very easy to kind of spoil, let's say, this kind of target, trying to find some sort of scapegoats, or this kind of be it migration. Actually, we don't have enough migration in Finland. That's a fact, and that has become a kind of a strange political debate at the moment. But still, these are very emotional topics, and that's where you can kind of hook. And ultimately, this serves somebody who is trying to kind of, let's say, distort the unity and the cohesion of the society, and this type of internal dynamics, or just to kind of course, like focus the debate on this type of issues, whereas we should be focusing the big picture, and what is happening to our democracies, how Ukraine is doing their bit on behalf of us all, and that type of thing. So it's a very manipulative thing. So I am kind of a bit beyond the disinformation narratives. I think that is just one tool, and it can be a very powerful tool if people kind of buy the idea. That's why Faktabaari as such is more into the media literacy and kind of a more pre-bunking, and we have to inoculate ourselves to this type of possibilities to disturb our minds, because it's a very manipulative environment we are living, especially in the digital platforms, and we are missing the human actions, or even the, let's say, the kind of a collective experience that we used to have when we were staring in within families, the television, and trying to discuss and what is really happening. Now we're all in our bubbles, and we can be unfortunately manipulated. Also on this
Although
serious.
Noam Chomsky tried to prove that the latest style of consuming the media, so that the whole family was watching the same TV, was also a kind of manipulation. Now we have the freedom of choice. At least we tend to believe we do.
Exactly, but we don't even know what the people are thinking, and yeah, it's a new type of challenges. That's right. I don't feel nostalgic to that one, but it's like this is still the kind of we have to adapt to these new things, and our brains are just bombarded with so much of information all the time. So then and this kind of built into the incertitude that of course the whole world is at the moment. So we are very fragile to some stories, and somebody who is going on to this kind of cognitive warfare have occasions, and disinformation is one powerful tool in the toolbox, so to say.
And what are the most widespread fake news in circulation at present in Finland? I can tell you some that have been appearing in Poland,
Yep.
like there is no global warming, that European Union will make us eat worms, or that the European Union is promoting sexualization of children. So that type of stuff that is being funded by more far right communities. What about Finland? Any affinities here?
To be honest, I don't really know, and I wonder who really does. I mean, if you have really tools, then specific on social media, you could promote this type of stories. And within some of the collaboration networks that we are also working with Poland and other EU member states colleagues, we have spotted some of those ones as well. But I wouldn't say that they are the prevailing stories. They are more like, somewhere hitting. To what extent they are really influencing things, I don't know how much we have evidence of that one. At least luckily these are not, perhaps at least in the mainstream media. So if these are happening somewhere, these are happening in social media again. And luckily people still in Finland seem to distrust the social media, at least when you have to kind of a balance. So I mean, so-called legacy media still even for example in COVID times, people were kind of returning a little bit to the legacy medias, even if you have to pay for that one in order to get some more quality news, some sort of gatekeeping, because it was getting pretty wild, because these are very emotional topics, and as such, even the global warming thing, I would say that in Finnish debate, it's like even in the political sphere, I mean, there's very still pretty few who are really like doubting about it or something like that. But it's more like, some are more pragmatic, and some it's more like, to what extent we can be the pioneer, because Finland has been very eager and very like forward looking, because these are ultimately, that is still the biggest problem in the world over time. But it's a long-term thing, and now we have more acute things, so it's a question of prioritization. But I wouldn't say that prevailing, at least to my understanding and what we have been discussing in Faktabaari. But fundamentally, I have to say that if only we would have tools to see that what is really happening online, and those tools or that kind of awareness is only in the hands of the platforms themselves, and they might not have incentives at the moment to share them, and why it's super important that the EU keeps pressure on them in order to know what's really working.
How would you define the specificity, any unique characteristics of disinformation landscape specific to Finland?
Perhaps just repeating what I was saying, that yes, the whole country has been kind of more or less aware, because we kind of were pre-bunking, so to say, the Russian getting active on this type of things already a long time ago. So that is kind of covered to an extent, and there is the unity.
Let me ask you, how would you define the specificity, any unique characteristics of disinformation landscape that is specific to Finland?
Yep. I think that links, as I previously was discussing, to the big global changes, because we are a borderland, so to say, in this case, and this is at least where the focus is at the moment, and how things are evolving, and this kind of fight for the future, and perhaps the kind of where things are going, more optimistic or negative directions. I think that's more like the mental battle that is going on. But specificities is that perhaps to Finland and Nordic countries altogether, I believe, based on our cooperation with them, is that you have still pretty trust-based societies, and obviously we might be trying type of methods that would not be, for example, possible in some more polarized countries yet. So there might be narratives who try to kind of break some national narratives that unite us, and that type of erode the trust type of things. So when the whole thing is about like kind of keeping some sort of cohesion, at least a minimum level, and trust to the institutions, so that is of course then specific, that we have to kind of look after that our institutions will renew and sustain when world is changing. And this is of course in the wider scale, of course, on the works, I suppose, in the EU level as well, because the whole EU value base is challenged, and the institutions. A complex answer perhaps, but try to kind of describe that what makes our society special also links to how it might be attacked or what we have to follow.
So now I would like to ask the final question with some option for constructive thinking. So I understand that a lot is being done in Finland to counter disinformation by spreading media literacy, your Faktabaari organization included. But what more could be done in your view?
Finland is often cited, especially yes, on the tradition in media literacy and relatively good education system. And I mean, overall, and in the European scale, I would tend to say that it's true. There is a good basis, but things are changing so quickly. And then we have institutions like the public broadcasters, that is the most trusted media, for example. That is not the case in, and this type of institution, libraries and this kind of media welfare system institutions that are all shaking but are still sustaining. So I think the question in Finland is that how do we renew them, and how do they adapt to this world, and how do they find their sustainable business models, or if the government cannot fund everything, and that has been pretty much the case in many cases, and how will the journalistic media that still sustains is able to have enough plurality so that people feel presented and all that type of things. Immediately, what I know perhaps the best and we are working on is that we try to modernize the media education field, and I mean bring it to the current challenges that are, of course, like both the social medias and the generative AI on our palms, so in our hands, in our mobile devices, and how do we kind of still encourage and promote the critical thinking while and the kind of curiosity to know more, because at the same time that these are powerful tools, they are very scary. Also, for example, the generative AI, we just published a guide, for example, teachers, where we still try to kind of prevent now that this is the next phase, so to say, that you can kind of distribute and create complete nonsense in seconds, and just fill out and pollute the information space, or you can use it to kind of let's say understand and coach yourself. And this is where we try to kind of now be a little bit ahead of the curve and understand at what age you should kind of and how would you use the generative AI, and what to do and what not to do. So we try to kind of future proof the institutions and try to sustain until we have, hopefully, at the EU level, the response. We have now, for example, the regulatory framework that I think the EU is pretty much the minimum level. National level things don't tend to work. They don't tend to be credible enough. But we need many types of things. Some are more national, some are more European level, but these are, let's say, very common challenges altogether, at least based what I've discussed with the colleagues all over the Europe.
Thank you. That's a very timely discussion we've just had. And this brings us to the end of the conversation about Finland. So, Mikko, thank you for sharing these valuable insights.
Thank you.
Truth Talk series is part of the project Guardians of Truth, fact-checking during Poland's EU presidency, which is supported by European Media and Information Fund, managed by Kolos Gulbenkian Foundation.